Sorry, I didn't see you.
Well, that's all right. Gosh, that looks drowsed off.
Me too. Well, look, it's getting light.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm back. Your uniform's all wrinkled.
Girl, I suppose these steps weren't made to sleep on.
Tired?
It's nice with you in my arms. I wish it could always be like this.
It will be.
Think so, darling? Think I'll be back? Got a big mess to clean up before we get back. We're not sailing for a Boy Scout convention, you know?
Yes, I know. Are you afraid, Tom?
Was it first?
Afraid?
Afraid they wouldn't take me.
Oh. I love you, Tom.
I love you, Betty. I guess that's one of the things this war is about.
About us?
About all young people like us. About love and getting hitched. Having a house and kids. Breathing fresh air out in the suburbs like this. Well, about living and working decent like free people.
Tom.
What?
I'm going to miss you. But
what?
But I'm going to be proud while I'm missing you.
This is War. The four major networks again join to present the 12th in their series of broadcasts for wartime America. To the Young by Norman Corwin.
We go off to the war, guys like Tom and me. We come home, pack a few things, get around as though we're nothing at all. Make it seem just as though you were going away on a 2-week vacation at Pine Point. Get out the old letters from your girl and read them. Take another look at the newspaper clips about how you won the hurdles and attacked meet with Sacred Heart. Scored a touchdown against James Madison. You unstring your guitar, put your tennis racket away in a frame. Then you come downstairs. Mom and Pop are standing there. You hug Mom. Give Pop a friendly poke in the ribs. You don't know what else to do. Then you grab your duffel bag. So long, Mom. I'll write you. Aren't you going to say anything, Mom? Well, so long, Dad. Take it easy.
Goodbye, Bill. Good luck, boy.
Go off to the war. And then there's that sadness that always hits you when you say goodbye to those you love, no matter what kind of a voyage you're going on. For a while, you sit in the train, watching the country roll by. You feel so lonely. Think of the folks. Your girl, Alice, your dog, Nick, and the Joyland Dance Palace down at Silver Lake, now that the nights are getting warm. And after a spell of that, your eye happens to catch a couple of billboards. You read them. A few seconds it takes for the train to move past.
40 miles to the Jefferson Hotel, centrally located, baths with each room.
You wonder how many miles to where you're going, and how centrally it's located, and whether there's hot and cold running water in the pillbox. There's another sign.
Visit New England this summer, the playground of the East.
You wonder whether you'll visit Old England this summer. Or maybe New Caledonia, or New Guinea, or New Zealand. And then it comes to you with a jolt that this thing that you're on your way to fight is called the New Order. Actually, it's the oldest racket in the world. As old as Pharaoh and the first slave. And there's another billboard.
Remember Pearl Harbor.
As though anybody could forget. though any American worth the price of a morning paper on December the 8th could ever forget. You have to wonder about that sign. I wonder whether it's such a good idea to keep remembering the shame and treachery of that day. You wonder whether you've been training for a year just to avenge some massacres in Warsaw and Rotterdam, or whether you've been getting ready to do something bigger than revenge, something greater. Maybe the biggest thing that ever happened in the history of civilization.
Excuse me, son. Have you got a match on you?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, yes, anyway. Yeah, here. Keep them. I got some more.
Thanks very much.
Bring your strength back in your chair again. Close your eyes. You muse about what kind of a world it's going to be when you're as old as that man across the aisle who just asked you for a light. Then there's a little surge in your blood as you realize that it's young men like yourself all over the earth who are going to answer that question. Those who have lived the least will make the most of their lives. Then a half dreamy thought comes through you out of the clicking wheel. This very night, this very hour, millions of young fellas like yourself are out working on the same job as you. Each one of them with folks at home and a girl named Alice and a dog named Nick. And you wonder, does a guy your age in England feel the way you do? Does a Russian fighter have your kind of thoughts? Does a Chinese private dream of what's to come? It warms your heart to think of your comrades, all the young folks in the fight. You wonder how it'd be to drop in on them here and there among the nations you're united with. Ask them questions. Help them lift a bomb into the racks. Drink a beer with them. Talk shop talk about the job you're on, about the world that's in the works. You wonder how a Tommy feels. How you'd get along with a red soldier. You wonder what's cooking around China. You wonder so hard that in a minute off you'd go around the world finding out for yourself.
Jenny's the prettiest number I've taken out.
I can see why you're nuts about it.
Long and slim. That's the way I like them. She travels in fast company.
Did she behave all right Wednesday night?
Oh, gave me everything I asked. Even with all that ack fire around us over Rostock, she handled beautifully. Well, the headwind slowed her down on the return, you know, but she still was fast enough to get away from those Heinkels.
Uh-huh. You ought to see our P-39.
Oh, I can hardly wait to fly one. I say, Edna, will you bring some more tea, please?
Righto.
Will you have time?
Sure. Look, tell me, Bill, how are they taking the war back in the States?
By and large, fine. Everybody's pitching in.
Huh?
There are still some crabbers, of course.
Oh, young people?
No. Old experts, mostly. Kicking about this and that, telling the Army and Navy how to run the war.
Yes, we had the same thing here for a while. Funny, isn't it? The blokes who do all the squawking and yammering are never the ones who do any of the fighting.
Yeah, some people give their lives, other people give their opinions.
Yes, quite. Tell me, is there any anti-British sentiment?
Well, the fifth and the sixth columns are doing their best to plant it and to nurse it along. But, you know, there's always a crackpot market for anything that's anti-sensible or anti-decent.
The good old Axis errand boys. Oh, you know, Bill, it's getting pretty late for that kind of stuff. I mean, when a maniac's loose in the house, there's no time to argue about who left the door open. Good Lord, man, you and I'd get absolutely nowhere if we spent all our time blaming the old fools who made the big mistakes 5 and 10, 20 years ago. The idea now is to go out and give the Axis hell and win the war and do it soon.
And when it's won, to see that it stays one.
Exactly. To have our say in the kind of world we're pulling out of the fire. There's no reason why anybody in the world...
Ready to go in 2 minutes. Ready, Hollister?
Oh, right with you.
Ready.
Look, Bill, I've got to run now.
Oh, it's been swell to sit here and talk with you.
Yes, well, one thing I wish you'd carry away with you, old man.
Yeah.
It seems to me the world's shrunk a lot since we were kids. Now, it's overnight from New York to London if you fly a ship as good as my Jenny. We're not far apart anymore, not in miles or anything else. We are fighting the same scrap. There are no longer a dozen big powers in the world. There are only two, good and evil. Whatever a man's accent may be, whether it's Cockney or Yorkshire or Brooklyn or Midwest or Russian or Chinese, he's fighting on one side, and that's our side. And, well, that man's a brother of mine, and he can wear my shirt and borrow my gun. Bill, give it to him. See you in Berlin.
So long, Fred. Cockney, Brooklyn, Midwest, or Russian. It's a small world, all right. The accent doesn't matter anymore. The accent now is on youth. The accent's on victory. Give it to them, Fred. Carry it home. They don't like the war in their own backyard. They prefer to fight in somebody else's. It's an old German custom. Fly fast, kid, and fly straight. But at that, I'll be over Germany before you. I'm on my way to Russia, Fred, to see a fighting man named Peter.
Right, Bill?
Yeah. Won't they spot us in the street?
Not if you don't move. Don't talk loud either. They're on the lookout for guerrillas.
What do you make in the telescope?
Take a look. Nazi field headquarters. They think they're well hidden, deep inside their own lines. I know the country a little better than they.
What's that car there?
Staff car. When they come out and climb into the car, that's when I go to work. Me. Katarina.
Katarina?
My sweet machine gun here. My little Katarina. My best girl.
Hey, Pete, what's that plane?
Nazi scout plane looking for guerrillas. You haven't seen any guerrillas in these woods, have you, Bill? Better keep your head low.
You've been guerrilla fighting long?
2 months. Fought with the army of the Southern Front when we stopped the Nazis at Rostov. Then when we began to drive them back, I was sent to train guerrillas in the occupied areas.
You know something, Pete?
What?
We Americans certainly had a screwy idea about you, Red.
Screwy? What means screwy?
I mean, twisted, queer. Somebody lied to us, Pete. They must have done a lot of lying over a long period of time.
So?
They told us you had a badly trained army, that you had no planes, that all your good generals had been killed off, that you were all starving to death. They told us you had no constitution, no faith.
Does America understand us any better now?
Oh, yes. But there's still some people who call you a menace. They say we'll have to fight you when we've both licked the Axis.
This is cruel. Who says that? Young people? Your soldiers and sailors?
No. A few cranks. And some editors. And the Axis radio. But the vast majority of Americans think you're doing a great job, and they're solidly behind you. We're not taken in by any new variations on the old lies.
You know what Filozofsky said about the losses we have inflicted on the Nazis?
No, what did he say?
He said, we have destroyed a generation of Germans.
You have, at that.
That means, Bill, we have helped to make free in the world that you and I will grow old in all the generations after us. This is a solemn thing to think about. Terrible. Yet sacred. Yeah. Now America is fighting with us. That's good. We Russians can beat Hitler here this year if we get some help.
Pete, do you think our countries will be good friends in the days to come?
Why not? Both of us have this same kind of aim. To help the common people live a better life.
You think that one...
Don't make a sound. They're coming out.
Many of them?
6. And Major General among them. Here, hold the cottage belt to that. Steady now.
That was the Germany I grew up in. Well, let's get back to these dishes.
Don't they sing that anymore, Hans?
No. They sing about the super race which will conquer the world. They sing about the decay of democracy and how they'll whip America.
Do you remember any of those songs?
Do you know the tune, O Tannenbaum, O Tannenbaum? O Tannenbaum, O Tannenbaum, wie grün sind deine Blätter.
Mel and my Mel.
Yeah, same tune. Old German folk song. Well, the Nazis have new words for it. America, America, oh filthy land, America. Democracy is a disease. We'll whip you till you're on your knees. America, America, oh filthy land, America.
I suppose they teach that to the kids.
That's for the older boys. Kids have their own hymns.
Hans, was it hard for you to make up your mind to desert to the Russian lines?
Oh, man is a traitor only when he betrays his country. I have not betrayed Germany by deserting Hitler. To the contrary. Now I can hope to join those who are really fighting for my country. Even if it's only kitchen police.
That's a good way to put it.
That's the way I've been putting it for 5 years. Since 1937, I was in the underground movement.
All that time?
I'm a Catholic. Remember when the Nazis killed our priests and jailed Cardinal Faulhaber and tore down the crucifixes in our schools to put up pictures of Hitler? Well, right at that time, I began the desertion which finished when I crept over the lines the other day. As far back as that, I saw that the Nazis were destroying not only Catholic youth, but all youth. Youth in Germany has one function: fuel for the war machine. Still, I tell you, Hitler burns up youth the way a motor burns up gas. Oh, that thing of building up boys to be soldiers is merely a kind of a refining process. The way you refine oil.
Hans, there have been barbarians before. Natural barbarians. But this is the first time that human beings have been trained to be barbarians.
Trained? You should see those poor kids in school getting the daily injection of poison. Why, there isn't a single subject which has not been perverted. This is class in nature studies.
Hi, Lydia. Now, this morning we are going to draw conclusions from our trip in the field yesterday. Albert, tell me, what did you see?
We saw an anthill.
Yes?
And beetles and a beehive and birds.
Yes. And everywhere you looked, you saw how nature uses the Führer principle. The principle of leadership. One thing you did not see, and that is the principle of democracy. Now, everywhere in nature, the leader has to be obeyed. The strong rules over the weak. You noticed how the ants did what was assigned to them without questioning. Now, class, which ants saw to it that the commands of the Führer ant were carried out?
The soldier ant.
Correct. You see, nature is very wise about all things, and nature intended soldiers to be the most important of all living creatures. When you grow up, you will be soldiers for Adolf Hitler. That is the highest glory in the world, to die for our people.
Or take a class in arithmetic. You might think, Bill, that stuff like 2 times 2 could not be distorted. But to the Nazis, every problem is a chance to drive another nail into a kid's head.
Here is your homework problem for tonight. In the year 1933, there were 66,060,000 inhabitants in the German Reich, of whom 499,682 were despicable Jews. What was the percentage of Jews then? Also, find out the number of inhabitants in the Reich today and the corresponding number and percentage of Jews.
They stop at no absurdity, of course. No lies too ridiculous. What else can children do but believe? You believed your teachers, didn't you? The kids in the drawing class draw soldiers and tanks and planes. The kids in chemistry class learn about poison gas and fire bombs. They grow up believing war is the only goal in life. That dying for Hitler is the supreme achievement. That bearing babies for the new order is the highest duty of womankind.
Hans, do you have a girl back home in Germany?
Yes. Anna. She's in the underground, too. Hope to heaven she's safe. And that she'll be there when it's ended. I hope there'll be a few young men like you and me left in Germany to undo all this twisted wreckage. To bring the light back to the people. It's been so long. So very long. We must win, Bill. This can't go on in Germany forever. It must be destroyed before all our young are broken and bled white. The unspeakable shame for the once proud name of Germany. The shame before all men and all history from now until the end of time. The shame that our great fatherland knows not its own sons. I'm sorry. I lost myself.
No, Hans. No, you found yourself. You found yourself 5 years ago when most of the boys your age gave in to Adolf and his gangster bums. Don't worry, we'll do what you're asking. We got some great guys and gals fighting on our side. Guys named Fred and Peter, and gals named Jenny and Katerina. And over in China, where they've been standing with their backs to the wall since long before any of the rest of us knew what it was all about, they're still in there fighting. Yes, sir. That's where I'm going next. When we win, kid, you'll get back to Anna. And I'll get back to Alice. And the world will get back to decency. You can bank on that.
Yes, we have come a long way, Mr. Bill. We were a passive people and a very old people in our hearts and in our minds.
I know, Miss Shen. I'm afraid a lot of Americans had the idea that China was made up mostly of laundrymen and Confucius. When the Japs first took you on, we thought you'd be knocked out in a couple of weeks.
You cannot defeat a fighting people if they want to fight. We are young now, as America is young. We are united now after all those years of revolution. We have given much to the world in the past, and we give much now. And in time to come, we shall give more. We shall know each other better.
I hope so, Miss Jen. And I believe so. I've been talking to other young folks, young fighting people, and they feel just the same way. No more splendid isolation when this one's over. Freedom in China is freedom in Texas, and Maine, and Iowa, and California. If we haven't learned that by now, we'll never learn it.
Will you take the tiller for a while? I will go below and cook something for all of us.
Yes, sure. Hey, this is some river. It's as wide as our Mississippi. Now, tell me, Miss Chen, how many of these junks have you moved upstream since the Japs bombed you out?
About 20. But we have not far to go now. We will set up the university again as soon as we reach Chongqing.
Gosh. Who'd ever think of moving a college 2,000 miles and carrying the whole works on donkeys and junk?
The Chinese would think of it. Mr. Bill, we have moved more than 100 of our universities this way. In China, education does not continue in spite of war, but because of war. We want young China to be ready after the victory, ready with the knowledge that will be needed to make the good life in a good world.
You know, Miss Chen, what's that?
Young Chinese soldiers on their way to the Burma front. They are saluting you.
Oh.
Wave to them.
Hi. Hi there, fellas. How's it going, fellas? The same to you. Give 'em hell when you get there. Good luck, fellas. Look out of the window and you see your country rolling by. The night's falling, lights are going on in the farmhouses, and somehow you're not sad anymore. Those lonely thoughts are no longer with you. Somehow you're not alone now, and you feel that you'll never be alone again. Because riding in the coach with you is Fred of the RAF, Peter the gorilla polishing his gun, and Hans and Anna of the underground, and young Miss Jen of China. And you know that everywhere tonight, the young are fighting, and the young are dying, fighting for themselves and all the future young, the yet unborn, will read about it calmly and talk about it and think about it in a world made wholesome by the fire and the blood. The train goes whistling through the night, through the same night that blacks out London, spreads eastward over France and Belgium, Norway, Denmark, Greece. The night that never will give way to day in any country, anywhere, if fascism should win the fight. And you know that it's all or nothing. Youth and freedom, or the living death. You feel in your bones. It'll be all right. It'll be a long one, and a tough one, but it'll be all right. Because of guys like Fred, and Hans, and Peter, and Miss Shen, and guys like you.
You have just heard To the Young, written and directed by Norman Corwin. Joseph Julian played the role of Bill. The music was composed and conducted by Johnny Green. Next week at this same time, the four major networks again unite the resources of American radio to present the last in their series of broadcasts for Wartime America. Yours received and contents noted by Norman Corwin. This is war.
General Douglas MacArthur was ordered to Australia, while Major General Jonathan Wainwright was given the task of delaying defeat for as long as possible. General Wainwright held Bataan until April 8, 1940, when he surrendered to an overwhelming force of 200,000 Japanese troops. But the island fortress of Corregidor held out until May 6th. Then Army listening posts in Hawaii heard these last drama-packed radio code broadcasts.
They're not near yet. We are waiting for God only knows what. How about a chocolate soda? Not many. Not near yet. Lots of heavy fighting going on. We've only got about 1 hour, 20 minutes before we may have to give up by noon. We don't know yet. They are throwing men and shells at us, and we may not be able to stand it. They have been shelling us faster than you can count. We've got about 55 minutes, and I feel sick at my stomach. I am really low down. They are around now, smashing rifles. They bring in the wounded every minute. It is a horrible sight. We will be waiting for you guys to help. This is the only thing, I guess, that can be done. General Wainwright is a right guy, and we are willing to go on for him. But shells were dropping all night, faster than hell. Damage terrific. Too much for guys to take. Enemy heavy cross-shelling and bombing. They have got us all around and from skies. From here, it looks like firing ceased on both sides. Men here all feeling bad because of terrific nervous strain of the siege. Corregidor used to be a nice place. It's haunted now. Withstood a terrific pounding. Just made broadcast to Manila to arrange meeting for surrender. Talk made by General Beebe. I can't say much. Can't think at all. I can hardly think. Say, I have 60 pesos you can have for this weekend. The white flag is up. Everyone is bawling like a baby. They're piling dead, wounded soldiers in our tunnels. I'm vomiting. Arms weak from pounding key, long hours. No rest. Short rations. Tired. I know now how a mouse feels. Caught in a trap. Waiting for guys to come along. Finish it up. Got a treat. Canned pineapple. Opening it with signal corps knife. My name, Irving Strobing. Get this to my mother, Mrs. Minnie Strobing, 605 Barbie Street, Brooklyn, New York. They are to get along okay. Get in touch with them soon as possible. Message. My love to Pa, Joe, Sue, Matt, Carrie, Joy, and Paul. Also to all family and friends. God bless them all. Hope they be there when I come home. Tell Joe, wherever he is, give him hell for us. My love, you all. God bless you and keep you. Love. Sign my name and tell my mother how you heard from me. Stand by.
The radio operator who sent those dots and those dashes and that fateful message was Corporal Irving Strobing. Now, miraculously, he survived the battle and many years as a Japanese prisoner of war. Very fortunately, he's with us now, and he is to tell us exclusively what happened after that last dot and that last dash were transmitted from Corregidor. Mr. Strobing, tell us exactly what did happen.
Well, Mr. Knight, the transmission was terminated when I was told that a Japanese tank was approaching the mouth of the tunnel. I thought it would be better for me to get further back in. We remained in the tunnel until the Japanese entered and took charge. We were then lined up in Malinta Tunnel itself, and in a kneeling position were tapped on the shoulder by a Japanese officer using a saber, and thus formally became prisoners of the Emperor.
You mean even under such circumstances, they went to that degree of protocol?
It was unexpected, but it did happen.
Now, did you ever realize, Mr. Strobing, that your radio message from Corregidor was broadcast all across the country?
No, Mr. Knight, I really didn't. I knew that certain portions of it had definitely been received, but had no idea of just what dissemination was being made.
What were the conditions, and how did you manage to survive such an ordeal?
Well, Mr. Knight, the term of imprisonment lasted 1,216 days. The first portion being spent in the Philippines in a camp at Cabanatuan until November of 1942, when I was removed to Japan itself. A 27-day voyage in the bottom hold of a Japanese freighter. Upon our arrival in Japan on the 27th of November in 42, I was put to work on a construction project, excavating by hand what was to be a dry dock and later pouring the concrete. After about a year and a half, I was transferred to another camp where we made little rocks out of big ones and also stoked the furnaces in a Japanese steel mill, and that lasted until September 5th, 1945, when we were liberated and returned to the United States.
Mr. Strobing, if I remember correctly, while you were still on Corregidor, you tried very hard to get a message through to your mother. Tell us about that, will you?
Well, the final transmission from Corregidor was a message to my mother and the other members of my family. It was received in Honolulu and relayed to Washington, and the Army was good enough to have a colonel deliver it at home.
Mr. Strobing, you're a very lucky man, and we're ever so grateful to you for being with us today.
This is Lieutenant General Wainwright. Subject, surrender. It became apparent that the garrison of these forces would be eventually destroyed by aerial and artillery bombardment and by infantry supported by tanks which have overwhelmed Corregidor. After leaving General Homer with no agreement between us, I decided to accept, in the name of humanity, his proposal. You will therefore be guided accordingly, and will, surrender all troops under your command to the proper Japanese officers. This decision, on my part, it was realized, was forced upon me by means entirely beyond my control.
Attention, Mr. and Mrs. United States. All over the nation today, Americans celebrated I Am an American Day. Lest their children forget, American parents today are reminding them of their heritage. An American means more than a statement of citizenship. By law, it means a constitutional charter of liberty and democracy. But to the people, it means a personal right to personal dignity. Once, American citizenship was a lesson in history. Now, it is one of geography. The Bill of Rights is being attacked tonight as strongly in the Arctic Sea as it ever was at Bunker Hill. The American rights of life and liberty are being assaulted as heavily on the Sahara as they were at Saratoga. But in our history is the answer to the Axis geography. Corregidor has fallen, but so did the Alamo. MacArthur retreated, but so did General George Washington. While the Tokyo radio was boasting that the Japanese army had gone forward, American army planes reminded the Japanese people that Americans always come back. American parents need not search for words today to explain what it means to be an American. The courage and devotion of Lieutenant Bulkley Captain Wayless, Lieutenant Commander O'Hare, and Mess Attendant Dory Miller tell it too well. That is the eternal price of liberty. Americans stand with bared heads at Valley Forge because American soldiers once walked there with bare feet. And north of Bataan someday, an American flag will again be raised on the very spot where Colin Kelly died.
Presents the news of the world on Wednesday, May 20th. Once again, Columbia's correspondents across the Atlantic and the Pacific are ready to bring you direct reports by international shortwave radio. This morning, we shall first attempt to call in Australia and then bring you the news direct from London and Washington. In addition, Harry Marble will report on developments not covered in our direct pickup. But first, here are this morning's highlights. The RAF made its first really large-scale attack since May 8th last night. Hundreds of British bombers blasted the submarine base of Saint-Nazaire and the industrial city of Mannheim on the Rhine. There was only reconnaissance activity north of Australia, but in southern China there was a big battle underway on the Yunnan-Thailand border. And now, Harry Marble.
In just a moment, we'll cross the Pacific for a direct report from Australia. But first, here's the news from Russia. Moscow says that fighting continues on the Kerch Peninsula and that the main body of Marshal Timoshenko's troops are still plowing straight ahead toward Kharkov. The Germans have launched a counterattack 80 miles southwest of Kharkov, and a British military commentator said this morning that if this Nazi drive toward Izium and Barvinkova reaches those cities, it would offer a serious threat to the whole Russian offensive. A correspondent of the Soviet newspaper Izvestia declares that the Nazi high command is using boys, cripples, and even Romanians to try to slow down the Russian drive. Our first report from overseas this morning comes from the Southwest Pacific. After a brief pause, we take you to Australia.
CBS Australia, William J. Dunn reporting. The northern air activity to the north of Australia, reported in today's official communique from Southwest Pacific Area Headquarters, is particularly interesting because it emphasizes the trend in that vicinity which, since the Battle of the Coral Sea, has been toward gradual acceleration. Only once before, since the repulse of the enemy in the Louisiana area, has there been a day with no outstanding air activity reported for either side. In marked contrast, attacks on Fort Moresby, particularly, have been increasing in intensity over a period of 2 weeks, reaching a climax on Monday when 49 enemy bombers and fighters staged an ineffective raid on Allied aerodrome installations. This was the largest force to strike at an Allied base on Australian soil since the February 19th raid on Port Darwin, in which 72 enemy planes participated. The attention paid Port Moresby in recent weeks, and particularly since the Coral Sea battle, is something up of the headache this Allied base has become to the enemy. Competent observers out here believe that future Japanese operations against Port Moresby may be regarded as a barometer of enemy intentions. The Australian government is making a determined effort to awaken the people of this country to the ever-present possibility of enemy air raids. Today, Robert Heflin, Minister of National Emergency Service, issued another warning. I feel it is my duty to emphasize that the danger of attack was never so great, he said. And the minister also warned that Australians who thought nothing was likely to happen because the Allied success in the Coral Sea were failing to appreciate the situation. Old-timers in the American Army Air Corps here in Australia are leading concerted cheers tonight for Brigadier General James A. Doolittle and his air fleet which staged the attack on Tokyo. One graying colonel, who has known Doolittle for 20 years, exclaimed, "Good heavens, I don't know why I didn't see the hand of Jimmy Doolittle in that attack from the very first. It had Doolittle written all over it." The news has also unleashed a flood of Doolittle legends, which any old-timer in aviation, military or civil, can recite by the hour. 2 months ago, I was talking about Doolittle to a couple of correspondents of the Busan's Hotel in Batavia, when Harold Galley joined us. Galley, who flew around the world with Galley Post, is now a group captain in the Royal Australian Air Force. As he sat down, I asked him a carefully worded question. Harold, which flyer, in your opinion, combines to the greatest degree the qualities of unpredictability with a complete mastery of his profession? And he never hesitated. Why, Jimmy Doolittle, of course. There's no competition. And you can check that opinion with any old-timer in the flying business. Any fellow who could fly solo across the Andes with both legs in a plaster cast would think little of a long-distance bombing mission. This is William J. Dunn in Australia, returning to CBS in New York.
Next, across the Atlantic to the British capital. We take you now to London.
CBS London, Bob Trout reporting. London new Royal Air Force bombers were out in force last night, but it was only this afternoon that we found out where they went. Target for last night was the German city of Mannheim, one of Europe's largest ports, and the German U-boat base at Saint-Nazaire on the French Atlantic coast. And British fighters attacked airfields in France and Holland. 12 British bombers and 2 fighters missing. Enemy planes made a short attack on a town in northeast England. London's military circle said today that the Russian advance in the Kharkov area is continuing, although more slowly. That German counteroffensive coming up from the south is thrust against the most tender spot of the Russian front in that sector. We don't know much about this German counterattack yet. The Russians have mentioned it once in a communique. The Germans have said nothing about it. The Germans are claiming all sorts of things on the Kerch Peninsula, including the capture of nearly 150,000 Russian prisoners. And, put together with other German claims, it is pointed out in London that this would mean the Russians used 250,000 men on the Kerch Peninsula, which is just about a physical impossibility. Yesterday's London evening newspapers headlined, "Kharkov Burning," a report which reached London from America. But London knows no more about this report than about those 2 other American reports. One, that the Russians had started a great drive all along the Eastern Front from Leningrad south, and that the Germans had started their big offensive with 2 million men. The House of Commons war debate went into its second day today after question time. Sir Stafford Cripps, who is leader of the House, as well as Lord Privy Seal, announced that it will not be possible for the Prime Minister to take part in the debate. A leader of the House was appointed last March for this purpose. It's the government's opinion that the debate should be conducted in the ordinary way, and the Prime Minister has made a recent statement on the war and feels there's nothing he can add to it at present, said Sir Stafford. Leslie Hoare-Belisha was today's first speaker. He wanted to know the basis for the new optimism and said, "I do not think the challenge has diminished in its seriousness." You've heard about that request the Admiralty made on the British Home Radio last Sunday for snapshots taken in any part of the world, which might, in the background, show some detail of military value. Now the Admiralty says it received 7,000 replies within 24 hours. One of the earliest from a man who has a collection of 4,000 photographs. Some of them may help on the next commando raid. The coming of spring has not taken from London its air of a city at war, but spring has changed the face of this biggest city in the world. The country has invaded the city and captured the parks sprinkled so liberally through London. An American like me, used to the grim steel and stone skyscrapers of America's cities, is always surprised to turn a busy London corner and find a square banked with lilacs, golden laburnum, and pink and white hawthorn trees. Yesterday, on a crowded street, I saw a wild duck paddling around one of those emergency water pools built in the basements of houses that were there before the bombs came. A few blocks farther, on the edge of a park, I came upon a group of soldiers working a stirrup pump, one of those pumps used to spray water from a bucket on incendiaries. There were no incendiaries yesterday. The soldiers were watering the tulips. This is Bob Trout in London, returning you to CBS in New York.
For the latest developments in our own nation's capital, we take you now to Washington. CBS Washington, John Purcell reporting. Still of paramount interest in this capital is General Jimmy Doolittle's account of the air raid last month on the Japanese mainland. The big question now is, when are we going to do it again? Well, that's a question that the Japs in particular would be like to be able to answer. And also, just where did the American bombers come from? There's been too much loose-tongued talk here in Washington about American military affairs. President Roosevelt, during a recent press conference, warned against incautious speech among officials. And leakage of vital military information has bedeviled military leaders planning the war's strategy. But the secret of Shangri-La, that mythical air base from which the bombers operated, has been a closely guarded one. Outside of the 80 airmen who participated in the raid, only a few high-ranking officials here know the details. Just where the never-never land of Shangri-La might be is a question that is posing a problem for German map makers. The president's quip about this fictional locality is being taken seriously by Hitler's masterminds. In a broadcast last night, the Germans reported, and I quote, Doolittle had carried out the attack against Japan from the air base Shangri-La, which was not otherwise described by Roosevelt. Several interesting points are gleaned from General Doolittle's account of the raid. The Japanese must have known that there was a good possibility of an aerial attack against the mainland by long-range bombers. Yet their preparations for defense were woefully inadequate. Not one American bomber was shot down. The general also revealed that the heavier bombers were able to outrace Jap pursuit planes except the Zero type. Most of their planes are copies of models developed by other nations, and it's encouraging to know that the imitative traits of Japanese craftsmen are seldom superior to original methods. As a matter of fact, the Jap Zero fighters, while maneuverable and fast, has sacrificed armor and heavier guns to speed up its performance. It may be significant that the Japanese pilots opposing the American airmen were inexperienced and lacking in aggression. Previous reports from American pilots indicated that enemy airmen operating in the Battle of the Indies were capable fighters. It would seem that if the Japs had enough experienced men, they would keep a goodly proportion at home to protect their vital war industries. A special Senate committee will meet today to probe the possibility of using inland waterways to transport oil to the East Coast. With warm weather, the problem of getting enough fuel oil to seaboard homes is not acute, but it may reach a crisis in the fall. That was apparent from the remarks of Robert Allen, an official of the Petroleum Coordinator's office. He informed a House committee yesterday that the most strenuous efforts would be required for the 1.25 million homes heated by oil in the eastern seaboard states to keep warm next winter. And all indications now point to the likelihood of nationwide gasoline rationing by July 1st. The Office of Defense Transportation is working on plans now. Officials here say rationing is necessary, even in oil-producing areas, in order to conserve passenger car tires. This is John Purcell in Washington, returning you to CBS in New York. And here are today's reports from behind the enemy lines in Germany and the occupied countries of Europe. Yugoslav sources report that the Germans have stopped using Bulgarian and Romanian troops against General Mihailovic's Army of Freedom in Yugoslavia. Too many of the Romanians and Bulgars were deserting to fight against the Axis. United Nations sources report this morning that the Germans have shot 15 Belgian and 5 French patriots for sabotage and are now preparing to incorporate Holland into Germany as a province to be called Niedermark. Edwin Shake, one of the American reporters who had left Germany in the exchange of Axis and American nationals, said today that Hitler is facing 5 serious production bottlenecks: the shortage of materials, of manpower, of transportation, of electric power, and the ever-growing threat of sabotage. And another reporter, Alvin Steinkopf, speaks of other shortages. For instance, shoelaces. There are no spares. Sewing tape is too urgently needed for other purposes. Old fishing lines may work, but look bad. Wrapping cord is no good because it's made of paper and won't stand up. Hitler hasn't solved the shoelace problem. And here are today's reports from Free China. A heavy downpour, which may mark the start of Yunnan's notorious rainy season, drenched the southwest border region of China today. The Chinese have looked forward to the rainy season as a new ally, which would hamper Japanese operations by washing out roads, flooding rivers, and spreading malaria. Chongqing says that crack Chinese demolition squads are helping the weatherman. They've blown up bridges, dynamited railroads, and blasted highways. And as the rains came today, crack Chinese troops were massed along the Burma Road and at other strategic points of Yunnan, and preparations were made to strengthen Chinese defenses fronting the border of Indochina.
CBS World News brings you the early morning reports of its correspondents for the news of the world on Friday, May 22nd. Today we shall call in the British capital and try to get you other direct reports by shortwave radio from somewhere in Australia and from Moscow. In addition, Harry Marble will give you the latest developments from points not covered by our pickups. But first, here are the headlines this morning. Successful naval action against the Japanese is reported from Australia, while the enemy has increased offensive activity in China. In Russia, the Red Army continues its steady advance in the Kharkov sector. In this hemisphere, Mexico may declare war against the Axis at any moment. At home, there's a good possibility that income taxes will be partly collected directly from pay envelopes. And now, Harry Marble.
Before calling in Australia this morning, here is the situation in China and on the Burmese border. From Chongqing comes a report that the Japanese have landed 25,000 troops in Fujian province, just south of Zhejiang, with the apparent aim of trying to knock out China this summer, or at least eliminating possible air bases which might be used by the Allies for air raids on Japan and Formosa. In this connection, Brigadier General Chenault, leader of the American Volunteer Group of Flyers, predicted that the United States could wipe out the Japanese air fleet if we could send 2,000 aircraft to the Far East. Meanwhile, in Yunnan province adjoining Burma, the fighting apparently has reached a stalemate. Our first report from overseas this morning comes from the Southwest Pacific. After a brief pause, we take you to Australia.
CBS Australia. William J. Dunn reporting. The news that an Allied submarine or submarines has sunk a Japanese cruiser of the Kako class, as well as 2 large cargo ships in underwater action, claims and gets first attention in the Australian press today. The fact that Allied planes staged another successful attack on land, destroying 3 planes and damaging 2 on the ground, is concerning to a relatively secondary position in the news of the day. As individual actions, the underwater fight was undoubtedly the more spectacular, and the loss of another 8-inch bomb cruiser is a serious blow to the Japanese. There are plenty of reasons, however, for regarding the series of Allied attacks on land, Rabaul, Timor, and the Louisiana archipelago as the most important offensive mission now being handled by the Allies out here. These vital Japanese bases will play an important part in the disposition of any further attempts for the Japanese to move south. The Japanese themselves have proved by all argument the futility of fleet operations against adequate land-based plane defenses without sufficient air strength to meet the opposing air forces. And the only way the Japanese can assure themselves of the air strength necessary to cover an important fleet movement in this direction is through the maintenance of advanced air bases along the route the waterborne force is scheduled to follow. The Japanese have those bases at Lae, Rabaul, and Timor, as well as the Solomons. There has been official Allied communique reference to a temporary enemy base in the Louisiana group. It is no secret that the Allies have done every effort to reinforce these bases, and, to some extent, they're succeeding. Consequently, the Allied blows at the position, if continued in sufficient strength, can become the most important achievement since the Coral Sea repulse. If the Allied force could succeed in decommissioning one or more of these enemy advanced bases, the loss of the Japanese would be infinitely greater than the loss of several cruisers. Those are the present optimists who foresee immediate danger to Japan in the wide dispersal of the forces throughout the Far East, and who are lengthening lines of communication which spread fanwise from Nagasaki, should pay particular attention to the latest landing by enemy forces in the Chinese coast near Fuzhou. The fact that the Japanese, in the midst of all their other activities, can find men, ships, and materials sufficient for another major offensive, can be taken as an indication that the enemy possibly isn't feeling the pinch of wide dispersal as keenly as had been hoped. And informed military observers continue to point out that with all her extended lines throughout this part of the world, Japan is still operating on the interior lines, and that our own are, of necessity, even longer and as vulnerable. It is still too early to start tabulating the fruits of victory in the Pacific. This is William J. Dunn in Australia, returning to CBS in New York.
Next, across the Atlantic to the British capital. We take you now to London.
CBS London, Bob Trout reporting. During the night, a few enemy planes came in over the coasts of England and Scotland and flew a short distance inland, but so far, no report of any bombs being dropped. London's military circles, surveying the Kharkov front, say today that the German counterattack coming north to Izum has taken a bite out of the big Russian salient, but there is no reason to think that this German penetration will increase or will even be able to remain where it is. As far as London can tell, the danger of this German counterattack has not increased since the attack was first made. And London's military circles do not know whether the Russians attacking in the Kharkov area have been able to break all the way through the deep German defenses and penetrate into open country. The Chief of Britain's Imperial General Staff, General Sir Alan Brooke, after a visit to Northern Ireland to inspect American troops, tanks, and other equipment, said, "With that gear and equipment and the men behind them, there is little doubt that we shall see very great things from the United States forces when the opportunity is given to them, and no doubt that will come." The Ministry of Works and Buildings announces that tomorrow the public swimming season opens in Hyde Park. In the middle of the city, the little bathing tents will be open for business again alongside that lake called the Serpentine. Another sign that, although spring seems just to have arrived, summer is almost here. It still seems destined to go down in history as the decisive summer for the whole world. But among people who discuss the war seriously in London, there is no easy belief that the decision is bound to go the right way. True, the mood of Britain is one of cautious optimism, but it is not only cautious, it is based on such facts as that announced yesterday by Minister of Labor Bevan, that Britain has mobilized manpower to a higher point than any other nation at any other time. It is based, this cautious optimism, on the belief that this mobilized man and woman power will continue to work and fight with a sense of the greatest urgency, knowing that time is short and the situation grave. Dispatches from the United States tell us today that in some American cities there is now flourishing the comfortable confidence that the war will end this year. For London, it seems obvious enough that this kind of complacency is just what the Germans want. The Axis worked long and hard to keep America complacent before Pearl Harbor. Since that Sunday in December, the Axis has worked long and hard to lull America back into that half-sleep, which made Pearl Harbor possible. Another doze at the switch will bring another and bigger Pearl Harbor. Probably the Axis does not quite hope to put the United States really asleep. Perhaps the best the Germans can hope for is the creation in the United States of that easygoing optimism which says the war will end this year whether we hurry or not. So why hurry? Why make more planes and guns and tanks than may be necessary? Of course, if all the United Nations do exert themselves to the utmost day after day, we might end this war before 1943. Miracles do happen. And if the United States win, the United Nations rather win this war this year, it will be a miracle. This is Bob Trout in London, returning you to CBS in New York.
In just a moment, we'll try to contact Moscow. Meanwhile, a dispatch from Vichy, France, says the French Admiralty announced today that the 1,379-ton submarine L'Hérault has been missing since May 5th. Now, for the news from Russia, we take you by way of San Francisco for a broadcast direct from Moscow.
CBS, Moscow, Friday, May 22nd. 3 p.m. Valery reporting. The big three-day tank battle on a sector of the Ukraine is still going on today. But this morning, the fight was losing its intensity. The ferocity of the battle is said to be telling on the Germans, with their tank men showing signs of cracking. The German resistance is losing its stubbornness against the force of Soviet tanks, artillery, and infantry. And the Germans have suffered heavy losses in tanks. The battle is proving the correctness of the new Soviet theory of mechanized warfare. Heretofore, it was thought that in battle against tanks, only technically trained tank busters should take part. That is, artillery, airplanes, and of course, tanks. While the infantry devoted itself to fighting off the enemy infantry. But the new Soviet theory is that the infantry itself should enter the battle against tanks with anti-tank rifles, grenades, and bottles of inflammable fluid. And the course of the biggest tank battle of spring 1942 is showing the effectiveness of the Red Army theory that tanks can be just as vulnerable against courageous infantry as they are against tanks, airplanes, and large-caliber artillery. Still repulsing a German offensive on their flank, Timoshenko's forces are storming ahead, and the tempo of the Ukrainian increasing in ferocity. A heat wave is now gripping the flat Ukrainian prairies, hot, sun-drenched, windless days, the sort the Germans used to welcome. Marching infantry and rumbling tanks raise clouds of dust in their wake. The solidness of the battle is turning the fertile Ukraine into a dust bowl. The smoke of battle hangs heavy over the trucks. The acrid fumes of black cordite sting the nostrils of the fighting men. Everywhere, the rolling bellow of the artillery cannonade resounds like the approach of a summer thunderstorm. The Russo-German War ended in 12 months today. On the military side, the war has passed through 3 stages. First, when the hitherto invincible Germans attacked and ran their third attack. Then came the first German setback of the Second World War. More than 40 divisions were held up in front of Leningrad. And then Hitler decided that his main target would be Moscow itself. And he marshaled 51 divisions against the Soviet capital. Leningrad refused to surrender, and Moscow became the city that boasted their head. The change in the course of the war is visibly reflected in the faces of the people of this state. Their broad, open faces have become cheerful.
We regret that the signal from Moscow is not of broadcast quality. We return you now to Columbia in New York. Back in New York, and American shipyards celebrating Maritime Day today give their answer to the submarine raiders by launching 27 ships, the most for one day since World War I. A Pacific Coast shipyard opened the celebration by launching a ship 1 minute after last midnight. The launchings follow throughout the day. One yard had 3 launchings. 6 yards launched 2 ships each, and 12 yards launched 1 each. The Maritime Commission originally planned to observe Maritime Day with 30 launchings, but speed-ups in production sent 3 of the 30 down the ways earlier this week. Maritime Day, the anniversary of the departure of the Savannah from Savannah, Georgia, on the first crossing of the Atlantic by a steamship, this year finds the nation facing probably the most critical shipping situation in its history. The demands of a global war and the submarine raids off the American coast make the need for ships even more urgent than in 1917 and 18. 4 new ships were placed in service today, and the Maritime Commission said shipyards are now averaging 2 ships a day, the best production record for 25 years. Mexico appears close to a declaration of war against the Axis powers as a result of the sinking of a Mexican tanker off the Florida coast last week. At any moment now, a statement is expected from President Camacho, and it is rumored that he has prepared a manifesto asking the Mexican Congress to declare war. Meanwhile, the situation has been further aggravated by reports that 2 more Mexican vessels have been torpedoed. Orders have been issued to the commanders of all military zones to remain at their posts.
État français, Radio-Diffusion Nationale.
Vous allez entendre Monsieur Philippe Henriot.
Il ne se passe plus de sommet qui ne nous apporte une nouvelle traîtrise de l'Angleterre. Des tracts de présentation luxueuses et illustrés coûteusement ont été jetés par la RAF sur Vichy. Ces tracts, à eux seuls, établissent la mauvaise foi britannique. Mais guerre des tracts, guerre des bombes, guerre des raids aériens de reconnaissance, quel déploiement de force contre la France seule. N'y a-t-il vraiment pas d'autres peuples avec qui l'Angleterre soit en guerre?
We go into the wild blue yonder, climbing high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. Adam, boys, give her the gun. Down we dive, spouting our flame from under, off with one terrible roar. We live in fame or go down in flame. Boy, nothing can stop the Army Air Corps.
Clear! Clear! Contact! Contact!
A toast to the host of those who love the vastness of the sky. To a friend we will send a message of his brother men who fly.
Thanks to those who gave their all a bowl, and down we roar to soar the rainbow on.
A toast to the host of men
sky under, keep the wings level and true. If you live to be a gray-haired wonder, keep the nose out of the blue. Flying men guarding a nation's border, we'll be there, followed by more. In echelon, we carry on. Boy, nothing will stop the Army Air Corps.